everyone. Thank you guys for coming in. And thank you guys for listing your name and organization in the chat. It's such an honor to have you all here. So today we are excited to partner with Access Reproductive Justice and have the Executive Director, Jessica Pinkney Gil, join us today. So I know that if you guys were here for November's Crucial Conversations, we had Sasha from Access Reproductive Justice come and speak about the important, amazing work that Access Reproductive Justice is doing. But for this Crucial Conversation, it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to talk about ways that we can organize and advocate in this political landscape. So we think it's a great crucial conversation, and this is the best person here to talk about it with us today. So without further ado, I'll give you guys a little background on Jessica. Jessica Pinkney Gil is a Black biracial advocate and reproductive justice practitioner in California. As executive director of Access Reproductive Justice, she leads California's only statewide abortion fund, combining direct services, education, and policy advocacy to ensure comprehensive access to abortion services for all residents and those traveling to the state. With a background in government relations and policy analysis, Jessica has worked with various organizations to advance social justice causes. She holds an MA in government from Johns Hopkins University and serves on multiple boards. Jessica's strengths lie in her practical approach and ability to navigate complex dynamics. Jessica's work is a testament to her commitment to building a just and equitable society where every individual can access their rights and thrive. Outside of her work, she's a mother, partner, avid reader, and continuous learner. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to Jessica Pinkney Gil.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much. It never stops being weird to have your bio be read. Um, but hello, as was said, I'm Jessica Pinkney Gill. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm really thrilled to be with you all today to discuss a little bit of what is likely ahead for us in a new political climate. As was named, I am the executive director at Access Reproductive Justice, which is California's only statewide standalone abortion fund and practical support organization. We are part of a national network of abortion funds, of which there are over 100 across the country and internationally. And as was mentioned, our Healthline Relationships Director, Sasha Nokimo, came and spoke to Black Women Revolt towards the end of last year. So I won't do the full history of Access and how we work day in and day out, but really want to focus specifically on our policy advocacy work and the political climate that we find ourselves in. Um, I joined Access in 2020, so I'm coming up on 5 years with the organization, and I've seen us through a wide array of changes in the political environment in which we do our work. I do think it's important to note that Access RJ does do direct service work. We operate a health line. Folks are able to call in and get support to access abortion care and the full range of reproductive health care support that they may need. But we pair our work, our direct service work, very closely with our outreach work and our policy advocacy work. So in addition to operating our health line, we have a volunteer engagement coordinator, an outreach and education coordinator, and a policy advocacy coordinator that really work closely with our Healthline team to understand what people's material needs are. And then we work on our outreach and policy advocacy side to help make those things a reality. For our volunteer engagement coordinator, that's really making sure that we have volunteers who are trained to support our callers, to support community members, whether it be in accessing abortion care or other reproductive health care, advocating for policy change, etc. Our outreach and education coordinator does a lot of work to ensure that we are putting resources out into the community that are vetted and really valuable for various community members to be using as they ensure bodily autonomy as we all fight for reproductive justice. And our policy advocacy coordinator really tries to listen and understand our caller experiences and our community member experiences to help that inform policy change, whether that be at the local, state, or federal level. And so we're all working very closely to kind of understand the experiences of the folks that we identify as our community. And working collaboratively to impact and affect change for those folks. So I will say, I think in a lot of ways, we have prepared for the moment that we're in politically because of the fact that in 2021, SB 8 went into effect in Texas, essentially banning all abortion access for Texans. And then shortly thereafter, the Supreme Court um, decided in the Dobbs decision to essentially make abortion access a states' rights issue. So that led to about um, half of all states having some kind of ban on abortion. I think it's really important to name that many abortion bans do still allow some folks to access care, but it severely limits the level of access that folks have. For example, if there's a 6-week ban in place, that is not an outright ban. People up to 6 weeks gestational age can access abortion care, but it does severely limit access for those who are at or beyond 6 weeks of care. So as I was naming, I think we really prepared for these moments with the SB 8 decision and the Dobbs decision. So, abortion funds really across the country jumped into action because we were mutual aid organizations, and many of us have existed for many years, if not decades, and are on the ground in communities across the country and really equipped to rapidly assist folks with accessing the care that they need, whether that be financial assistance or logistical assistance. I think it's increasingly hard to do that work in a environment where bans of any kind exist, right? Because now our Healthline staff has to know what the laws are in every state and um, how they may impact the patients that we're supporting on any given day. And so I think, we anticipate in a Trump administration and a Republican majority Congress that states will really feel emboldened in a lot of instances to increase the barriers to accessing abortion care and the full range of reproductive health care in a way that they may not have felt under a Biden administration. And so that's something that we're really anticipating. I think, similar laws to SB 8 in Texas, um, increased surveillance to folks or on folks who may be traveling across state lines to access abortion care. Um, increased surveillance kind of broadly as we think about our digital footprint, and how we utilize the internet, our smartphones, AI, even social media to access our healthcare, in what we all know is a very much broken healthcare system. So I think that's something that we're anticipating for. We are anticipating. We ourselves have put a lot of thought and effort into how we minimize our digital footprint, how we protect caller and patient data and information, how we scrub our data, to really ensure that we're not holding on to any information that could unintentionally criminalize an individual who's trying to access reproductive health care, in a heightened, and in environments where folks are likely to be criminalized. Um, I can drop in the chat. There is a really wonderful group that we work with quite frequently, the Digital Defense Fund. And they are a group that put together a lot of resources specifically for abortion funds and other justice minded organizations, and they essentially are really trying to support folks in utilizing technology, um, in ways to support our community members without, further stigmatizing, further criminalizing, or endangering folks. And so the Digital Defense Fund is a resource that I always like to recommend to folks who are doing this type of work, particularly working with folks who are accessing reproductive health care. Um, so that's one thing I think that we're really anticipating in this new environment is just, um, like I named, heightened criminalization and a need to really ensure that we as organizations are protecting ourselves and our patients, our clients, our callers, as much as possible, recognizing that. Um, the information we collect, the data that we have access to, can unintentionally harm folks and further criminalize them. So that's one thing. In terms of what we are anticipating at the federal level, this is something that I have a really hard time talking about. Um, as a Black woman, clearly as someone who works in a progressive space, and in a justice-minded space, I don't like to give a lot of attention um, to people who I find to be racist, misogynistic, and highly problematic in all the ways that we know that, generally Donald Trump has been, as past president, and as his party has been as well. And I think we also know that there is a real evil that exists, with our incoming president and many of the folks that he will likely be nominating to cabinet positions. And so part of my not wanting to give a lot of attention to them is this is a situation, I think, in past um, political environments that may not be supportive of reproductive justice or domestic violence advocacy or housing, all of the issues that I know we care about. There has been some level of scenario planning that one can do. You can, to a certain extent, anticipate what might be coming. And I think what we saw in the first Trump administration is there is less of that. He is a little bit more of a loose cannon, a little bit harder to anticipate um, his movements, his decision, his actions. Um, and you can anticipate that they're not going to be in our favor. So I will say I have seen less kind of scenario planning occurring over the last 2 months, um, since his win in November. Not because I think people don't care, but I think because it's hard to scenario plan when there are thousands upon thousands of scenarios at play, right? But I think we certainly can anticipate, to a certain extent, that this is not an administration that's going to do us any favors. And so, what that really requires is for us to do everything we can proactively to be prepared to then have to be on the defensive. Um, I think where we can anticipate a little bit more what's coming down the pike is certainly with the Congress. This is going to be a Republican-controlled House and Senate. And on a good day, our United States Congress is barely supportive of reproductive health rights and justice on a good day. And so we are not entering good days, right? And so since the new Congress came into um, session earlier this month, we have already seen House Republicans doing some really kind of like wonky procedural moves to fast track legislation for votes, which is not incredibly uncommon. I think when any party is controlling Congress, right? Like there is a desire to be able to move things and move things rapidly and to really kind of work the system to their advantage. And so we're seeing that. The first instance of that is HR 28, which is a bill that would exclude trans, intersex, and non-binary people from school athletics programs. It's a really discriminatory sports ban that is obviously very intended to target trans folks, non-binary folks, and intersex youth in particular. Um, and I don't think anyone is particularly surprised to see that trans folks, particularly trans youth, are some of the first communities that this Congress and this administration will go after. I think a lot of what we'll see in immigration spaces, in gender justice spaces, is what we also expect to see with reproductive health and rights. So I anticipate, the last I heard, I think there was a desire to try and vote on that bill this week, if not next. And then, assuming that it passes, it will move to the Senate. Um, so that's something that we're seeing and paying attention to. I highly encourage folks to follow and engage with the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights. They do a lot of work at the intersections of the issues that I know we all care about and are working on, and are tracking a lot of these bills, and really will have calls to action for folks in terms of calling your member of Congress, writing a letter to your member of Congress, and advocating around this type of legislation. The other bill that we're anticipating in the next week or two is the so-called Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. The last I looked, they hadn't actually released the text of this bill yet, but congressional staff was expecting that it would come down the pike as it has in prior Congresses. This is an anti-abortion bill. It's highly inflammatory, and not only really stigmatizes abortion later in pregnancy, and the providers that provide that necessary care, but it imposes new and extreme criminal penalties in an extreme attempt to limit abortion care and intimidate and ultimately criminalize abortion providers as well. Again, I don't know exactly when they're likely to vote on this bill, but I think we could anticipate that it would likely be teed up sometime next week because the Roe v. Wade anniversary is January 22nd, and the March for Life often takes place either the weekend before or the weekend after. I quite frankly couldn't tell you when it is this year. I think it's the weekend after because this upcoming weekend um, is Martin Luther King weekend and Monday is Inauguration Day because it feels so bizarre to be inaugurating this president as we celebrate the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. Um, to the question in the chat, the first bill does impact minors. The trans, intersex, and non-binary bill is very specific to youth and school athletic programs. So it would definitely impact minors. Also, the Born Alive Abortion Survivor Protection Act would impact any minors who are accessing abortion later in pregnancy, which certainly does occur. So, yes, certainly do have impacts on minors. Both of these bills are in their early stages, as I've mentioned, kind of the first step of the legislative process. They would, once introduced and voted on in the House, have to go to the Senate. Um, the Senate hasn't indicated at this time that they would take these bills up, but that can change. And then under a Trump presidency, we imagine that he would sign these bills into law. So advocacy will be needed at all of the various stages. And so I can certainly make sure that I follow up with you all around any next steps there. That's what's happening federally that we know of. I think the question that I get pretty frequently is what happens if there's a national ban? Um, I don't really love to answer this question, not because it's not something we're thinking about, but because it's, again, one of those situations where it could happen so many different ways at so many different points in time under so many different circumstances that it's a little hard to concretely address now. Um, Trump did say while he was on the campaign trail that he would not support a national ban. I think that was obviously because he was trying to appeal to folks who have clearly shown support for abortion. As we know, abortion has been a winning issue on ballots all across the country in red and blue states. Whether he changes his mind on that, hard to say. Again, he's a pretty unpredictable character. Um, we do anticipate if there were a national ban, a federal ban on abortion, it would be a gestational ban. So at 10 weeks, 15 weeks, 6 weeks, who knows? We don't anticipate a outright abolition of abortion writ large. And again, hard to predict. So, I think it's really important for folks to clarify with the communities that you're working with that today, particularly in California, abortion is still legal and accessible. And I think it's really important to be reinforcing what the law is now, both federally and at the state level, and just continuing to reinforce that when we have more information around how the laws have changed, making sure that we're updating our communities appropriately so they know limitations. Something I do advise in this political environment is advanced provision medication abortion. So folks are able to access medication abortion via telemedicine providers, and you can get it in advance of needing it. That's what I mean by advanced provision. So there are a few places where you go online. You say, I'm not pregnant at this time. However, I want to have pills on hand. Should I become pregnant? There's like a process. You pay the fee, and the pills will be sent to you, and you can have them on hand. That is something I recommend. Access Reproductive Justice can support people with financial resources to pay for advanced provision medication abortion if needed. This does not solve all problems, right? There are many folks who don't know that they're pregnant in time to utilize medication abortion, to utilize pills. It is not the desired way for everyone to have an abortion. Medication, a self-managing an abortion in your home is a choice. It is also a privilege, and it is one of many options. But some folks prefer to go into a clinic and have a procedure, to have access to a medical provider, etc. So it's one option. I think it is not always the ideal option for everyone, and I do recommend that to the extent folks feel comfortable having pills on hand as we enter a rocky environment is not the worst idea. Again, if you're utilizing those pills in an environment in which abortion has been banned, there is still risk, correct? And, I think it's really important for people to understand the risk. There are some really wonderful legal resources available to folks. If, when, how operates the legal defense hotline and can support folks with questions around the risk that they're taking, and support with um, a legal defense if it's needed. If, when, how is generally a really great resource for folks to access if they need legal services, if police are contacting you about a pregnancy outcome, if you're being denied abortion care, particularly life-saving abortion care, if you need a lawyer for judicial bypass hearing, which is not an issue in California, but it is in other states, if you're having some kind of legal emergency, if, when, how is really a wonderful resource. So I've dropped their link in the chat as well. They have multiple hotlines, and also a defense fund to help with funding bail or legal fees for criminal, family, or immigration defense, and can also support if someone's being criminalized for abortion or pregnancy outcomes. So that's a little bit of the federal landscape. I think people feel very safe in California. California identifies as a reproductive freedom state, a state that has done quite a bit, particularly over the last few years, to improve abortion access and increase abortion access in the state. And the governor and the legislature appear prepared to continue those efforts. And national federal law can supersede state law. So if there is a national ban on abortion, it will be interesting to see what the state can do, and will do to protect patients, providers, and those supporting patients and providers within the state. I certainly anticipate, based on Governor Newsom's statements thus far, that he'll do anything and everything he can to insulate and protect Californians and those who are in California to access reproductive health care. And I do think there will be limitations. I can't entirely name what those are because, again, I think it's a little dependent on the situation at hand. Um, but I do think it's really imperative to be encouraging our state legislators, our local legislators, and our governor. I think it's really imperative to be reminding them that reproductive rights, reproductive justice is on the line. Just because we are a reproductive freedom state, just because we have made past investments and improvements to our infrastructure, does not guarantee us safety and security in this moment. And it is imperative for our legislators at every level to keep their eyes on the road, their foot on the gas pedal. We can't just say, oh, the governor made $200 million in investments in 2022 following the Dobbs decision. That's not enough. We need continued investment and reinvestment and continued attention because just as we anticipate this administration will come after undocumented folks, and honestly, folks who have documentation, right? Just as this federal government will come after our trans and intersex and gender non-binary folks, both young folks and adults, we know that they'll use many of the similar tactics to slowly chip away at our access to reproductive health care. And so it's really necessary in these moments that the local legislatures and the state legislature do everything in their power to guard us, to protect us from those shifts. And again, at some point, it may feel like there's only so much that the state and local leaders can do, but I don't think we're at that point yet. Um, so the last thing I'll say before I would love to just answer questions and be in conversation with folks is following SB 8 in 2021, Governor Newsom called on reproductive health rights and justice advocates to come together and really prepare a response to that specific moment, which was impacting Texans primarily, but also for us to prepare for the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which we saw in the Dobbs decision in 2022. I keep wanting to say 2024. Anyways, time. Policymakers, researchers, advocates, providers, patients, and other constituents came together at the end of 2021 and put together over 45 policy recommendations to policymakers, including the governor and the legislature, that really prepared California against threats to abortion rights and access. Since then, over 30 bills have been passed and signed into law by the governor. These do everything from protecting patients to protecting providers, increased funding for low and no cost abortion care, increased funding for organizations like Access, who are providing practical support and logistical support to folks who are accessing abortion care, investments in our physical infrastructure and our digital infrastructure, investments in building the provider pipeline. About 40% of California counties have no abortion providers. So we also have, pretty vast abortion deserts, even here in a reproductive freedom state. So there have been investments made to really ensure that we can improve the education of providers in the state and increase the number of abortion providers in state. So a lot of various investments. Um, I'm going to drop the link for that council. It's the California Future of Abortion Council. You can see the initial report that we did in 2021. We did an addendum to that report in 2022. And there are quite a few kind of materials. There's a checklist of what we've accomplished thus far. There's some of the budget letters that we've sent to Governor Newsom. And we're in the process right now of really prioritizing what is needed in this particular moment for this legislature and for this next budget cycle. So I would encourage folks to, come back to this website in the coming months because I think you'll be able to see updated resources for this legislative session in the near future. And that is to say, I think if there are folks who are interested in being engaged as well in the California Future of Abortion Council work, that group is over 200 advocates, researchers, providers, individuals who have had abortions, and many, many more who are engaged in reproductive health rights and justice, both like very closely and more tangentially. So if folks here are interested, I can also drop my email in the chat, and I would be happy to get folks connected to the listserv and some of the working groups and how you can engage in and keep up to date on what's happening here at the state level. I'm going to stop talking for a minute and see if Andrea, if you have specific questions you would like me to address, or if folks here joining us today have any questions that I can answer.
Okay, 1 second. Oh, I was on a loop there, a doom. Alondra Flores says, I would love to see how I could get involved. I guess maybe on a more micro scale. I know that you mentioned that about sending letters and stuff. Is there any other recommendations that you might have?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I know many of us are very disillusioned with our political systems, and we voted these politicians into office, whether we ourselves voted for them or not, right? And so I do think we have a responsibility to hold them accountable as their constituents. And so I do really encourage folks to look up who your local policymakers are, whether that be like city council or board of supervisors, and then also at the state level, your assembly members and your state senators. It really does impact them to hear from us. And I've actually been getting feedback, and I know some of my colleagues have been getting feedback that they don't feel like they're hearing enough around reproductive health and rights right now, and how like what the need looks like. And I think again, that's hard because we don't know what we're anticipating coming down the pike exactly. We just know it's not good. Um, but I think to the extent that folks are experiencing barriers and accessing care, that there is increased need for abortion access for reproductive health access in the state, it's really important for local legislators to hear that. I think, organizationally, I encourage folks to set up meetings with their legislators. There's a lot we can do as 501c3 orgs to educate our legislators around the impact of their decisions and their policies on our communities. That is, perfectly legal and compliant with your 501c3 status. On an individual level, I think to the extent that folks are comfortable sharing um, stories and experiences, that's always really beneficial for legislators to hear. Of course, I think if you're working through or with an organization, there's also a lot of ways to anonymize those stories and information to protect people's safety and security. Um, so that's one way. I think engaging with other local organizations Like I named, the leadership council often has calls to action for folks, and is, really able to, because of their staff size and organizational size, to like really track all of the heinous things that we might be seeing at the federal level, and can help folks, sign on to letters, get in contact with federal legislators, etc. Um, my biggest ask always is a little bit more in the culture shift realm, and that's specifically um, doing anything and everything we can to destigmatize abortion. I always joke, but not so much, that I say the word abortion more than I say my spouse or my child's name. I run an abortion fund, so it's not not that hard, right? But I think, having the conversations at the dinner table, at community gatherings, um, really doing the work that we on an individual basis can do to destigmatize abortion and socialize abortion as part of the broader healthcare spectrum and basic healthcare that people need at various points in their lives. I think is really important, and part of our long game, part of our long-term strategy, right? I don't think anyone thinks we are going to have the level of access we had under Roe v. Wade this year. But I always say it's a marathon, not a sprint. And just as it took decades for the antis to dismantle Roe v. Wade, it will take just as long, if not longer, for us to rebuild it and to rebuild it better. And so I think also, while we're trying to help people who have time sensitive needs and need to access reproductive health care today, tomorrow, and always, I think it's also important to think about long term what kind of culture shift work we can be doing, what kind of programming we can be offering within our communities, within our organizational institutions and infrastructures to destigmatize abortion, to familiarize people with abortion, and um, to share our stories. And again, I don't ever want stories to be used negatively. I'm not trying to re-traumatize people. Um I think that there is often storytelling that is done in really like unethical ways, that's really traumatic. And I think um Renee Bracy Sherman, who runs We Testify is an abortion storytelling organization, always says everybody loves somebody who's had an abortion. And I think um, the work that we need to do around making people really understand that, like your neighbor, your aunt, your sister-in-law, whoever it may be, right? Like someone in your community has had an abortion. And often what we find is when someone knows and understands someone's personal circumstances a little bit more, it often makes them much more amenable and open to having a broader conversation. So that would be my final say in terms of like kind of more direct action that folks can take in this moment.
Hi, I wanted to jump in here. My name's Nayeli. I'm a peer advocate at KUAF. And I just really want to say that I appreciate how you mentioned the HR 28 bill and how showing up for other marginalized communities is really important right now and how these issues will intersect. And I just wanted to ask if you had any resources for organizations that can come to speak to community about abortion knowledge and issues. Here at CUAV, we like to host events where we invite community to come and learn about a topic. And I feel like abortion, reproductive rights is a very important one. So yeah, I just wanted to ask if you had any resources to share around that.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I mean, Access is always happy to come and talk to folks about abortion. I think I always love to lift up Black Women for Wellness. They're a Los Angeles-based organization, but they do work all across the state and are really focused on um, Black women, girls, and gender non-binary folks, and their experiences, not only accessing abortion and reproductive health care, but just living healthy lives. There's also a partner organization that we work really closely with, California Latinas for Reproductive Justice. Um, again, another really wonderful partner who lifts up a lot of the intersections in this work, particularly thinking about housing and reproductive health and rights. Um, those are the two that are immediately coming to mind, but my email is in the chat and I'm happy to connect you with some other orgs. Act for Women and Girls in the Central Valley is another great reproductive justice organization. And I'm trying to think specifically of the reproductive justice orgs because um, we're often approaching those intersections, right? Around housing, intimate partner violence, young folks, gender expansive folks, etc. So based on what you've named as your interest, I think those would be some good groups to connect with.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
Any other questions?
I just had a comment. Thank you for being here, Jessica. We had you in October for our Domestic Violence Awareness Month event. And again, with the political climate that we're currently experiencing and being aware that even here in San Francisco, the call for more security officers in our Planned Parenthoods in response to zealots, for lack of a better word, attacking people at the door for Planned Parenthood who aren't even necessarily receiving abortion type services, but trying to get simple things like a pap smear or their birth control pills. It's so important that we band together, particularly during this time. And I love that Alondra asked, how can she get involved? And I love that Niali asked, who can come and speak with her crew of people as well. We have to speak for each other. We have to speak with each other. And thank you so much for being here and lifting this important issue.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think, I'll just say I really, folks are always like, oh, we're in California. We don't have to worry about these things. And I really caution people around that, right? Like, access reproductive justice has existed for 31 years. That means for 31 years, people have needed to access care in California and have faced barriers, right? Like, and of course, those barriers have ebbed, they've flowed, they've changed over time. But I really I hate to be like the doomsday person, but I do really like to caution folks in California, in the Bay Area in particular, around not getting complacent. We have to band together. We have to acknowledge that even within our own communities, there are folks who don't want to ensure that we have bodily autonomy, that we have healthy relationships, healthy sexual relationships, that we have access to the full range of reproductive health care. That is a human right. There are clinics, even in the Bay Area, particularly clinics outside of the Bay Area, Northern California and beyond, that face a lot of clinic violence, that face other intersecting issues. I always think of our friends in Northern California who are often facing issues around fires. We're currently seeing that in Los Angeles too, right? And so that impacts the clinics specifically, but it impacts the patients, of course. We have clinics that are currently closed in Los Angeles, and so folks have had to move to different clinics or cancel and reschedule appointments. In some instances, leave the state, right? So, and that's something that our clinics in the more rural parts of the state really face. Lack of secure internet access, lack of secure electricity, lack of safety and security, both physical and digitally. And so these are, while the state may broadly identify as a reproductive freedom state, while our local governments may be generally supportive of these issues, I think it's really important that we don't get complacent. And really show up for each other and make sure that we understand what the environment around us does look like, and how we can and lift up and support each other.
Awesome. I think we are getting close to our time, and I would like to respect other people's times. Um, I do have a couple questions, but I don't want to intrude. But thank you so much, Jessica, for speaking with us today and keeping us informed on ways that we can advocate for ourselves. It's been very insightful. And I encourage everyone here today to please reach out to Jessica if you do have any other questions, or find ways that you would like to get involved, and the resources that she provided for us as well. So thank you so much, Jessica, for everything. And I wish you guys all a great rest of your day. Thank you guys so much for taking the time and learning about ways that we can all advocate to support our community. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for having me, and the wonderful questions. I really appreciate it.
Thank
Always,
you.
we'll have you back.
Bye.